Hey, Slider Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Welcome to our latest special, COVID-19, America's Helping Hands. We're going to talk to Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, about his and many other companies that are and what they're doing to help in this time. We're going to talk with Gordon Chang about China and how they're the worst, and their attempts at face mask diplomacy and how that's failed around the world. And we're going to wrap up with the Salvation Army about our attempts to help around the world. If I could give one message before we get started here, your soul was never designed for this, to handle this. Human beings were not designed. Like, if you want to be all sciencey, our prefrontal cortexes were not designed for this. If you want to be religious-y, our souls were never designed to take in all the pain and suffering of the world. John Eldridge's book, Get Your Life Back. It's awesome. I just finished it. He said, all the tragedy of the world, the heartbreak, the latest shooting, earthquake, your soul was never meant to endure this. Your soul was never meant to inhabit a world like this. It's way too much. Your soul is finite. You cannot carry the sorrows of the world. Only God can do that. Only He is infinite. Somewhere, sometime in your day, you've just got to release it. You've got to let it go. So first thing to know, if you're getting anxious at all throughout this, or overwhelmed, or frustrated, or annoyed, or whatever, you were never meant to carry the burdens of not only knowing about how it's affecting you and your family, but how it's affecting everyone in the world at all times. Difficult. So I just want to give you permission that you're not supposed to handle all that. I got a couple minutes here. I want to talk about being an optimist during this time, or at least not being a pessimist, and how to do that. There's a fine line between reality and pessimism a lot of the time. I think one of the best ways to find peace and to have gratitude and be an optimist in this time is to look for beauty. In terrible times especially. Right? I know people say, so this is not a time to look for beauty. We're approaching 100,000 deaths and the economy's in ruins. This is no time for beauty. I would argue this is especially a time for beauty. Mary Shelley, she wrote Frankenstein, but she wrote a bunch of other novels as well. One of the books she wrote is called The Last Man. She wrote it right after her 3 kids died. 3 of her kids died, 2 from an infectious disease, and her husband just drowned in a boating accident. So listen, I don't want to downplay anyone's difficult things that are happening in life, but if we were in the business of ranking difficult times in life, I think Mary Shelley's situation at this moment would be pretty high in the rankings. So this book, The Last Man, the narrator is basically Mary. Her experience is speaking through the narrator. In the book, there's a plague, and it's killing everyone that this guy loves. So he goes home to seek safety. He goes home as a storm-driven bird does to the nest in which it may fold its wings in tranquility. So it just looks for peace, right? He leaves the business of life. This is the early 1800s, right? The like how difficult and busy life is. He's like, I gotta get out of here. And when he does that, when he leaves, he can finally be at peace to contemplate the important things of life. And here's what the narrator says. Who that knows what life is, meaning difficulties, the busyness, the pre-pandemic life, who that knows what life is would pine for this feverish species of existence? Like, who would want that life that we came from? I have lived. I've spent days and nights of festivity. I've joined in ambitious hopes. So he's like, I've done all the stuff. Now shut the door on the world and build high the wall that it is to separate me from the troubled scene enacted within its precincts. In other words, he's over that old way of life, been there, done that. And it's not worth it. It's too much. So what does he seek instead? Let us seek peace near the inland murmur of streams, and the gracious waving of trees, the beauteous vesture dress of earth, and sublime pageantry of the skies. Let us leave life, like the busyness of life, the pre-pandemic life. Let us leave life so that we may live with nature. As Walt Whitman said, after you've exhausted what there is in business, politics, love, and so on, you found nothing, none of these things satisfy. What remains? Nature, remains. And that's what John Eldredge's book is all about. It's all about finding peace in a hectic world, not living like chaff, but like a tree planted by a stream of water, as the Bible says in Psalm 1, and drinking in the beauty, because your soul needs it. Your soul needs it. He has this great line. He says, beauty rescues. It rescues because it's merciful and comforting. It heals and restores and revives and renews. There's so much research out there that a patient recovers faster in the hospital and needs less pain medicine and can leave the hospital sooner if their window in their room just looks out at nature. Read an article the other day about a doctor who said the two best therapeutics are music and a garden, music and nature. And the great thing is you can find this beauty everywhere. It's all over all the time. And it's so sometimes it's difficult to find, but it's there, it's everywhere. It may be a very, very painful time for you right now, but if I can encourage you to look for beauty somewhere. Find beautiful things. Actively go out and look for beautiful things. Take the time that you're not commuting, a lot of us, and walk somewhere. Go find beauty wherever it is, because it's out there, I promise you. And now we need it very badly, desperately, we need it. I'll forward you again. Remember a couple weeks ago we talked to Samaritan's Purse? And the nurse, she's one of the nurses told this story. I never forget, I think about it all the time. One of the nurses at Samaritan's Purse learned Italian. And she sang this song to a man as he was dying. It was like his favorite song in Italian. Obviously, they were in Italy. Like, that's max beautiful. That's like Yosemite level beautiful. And there's moments like that even in the midst of this. Mary Shelley said, there's but one solution to the intricate riddle of life: to improve ourselves and to contribute to the happiness of others. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We talk all the time on the show about trying to improve ourselves, but today we're going to talk about contributing to the happiness of others. We're going to talk to people who are doing just that. Mike Slater here with our special America's Helping Hands. The My Pillow guy coming up next. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, welcome back to our special America's Helping Hands. I want to go to Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, and his books, What Are the Odds? From Crack Addict to CEO. Mr. Lindell, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great.
I want to talk about masks in a minute, but first, let's talk big picture. When did you decide? Because there had to be a moment when you had the option of making your pillows in China or Taiwan or wherever, or America. When was that moment?
Right from the first day I invented it. I never even said second thoughts about making it here. I was always going to make it here. And people say, oh, you can't make a pillow, you can't make anything in the U.S. It needs to be made overseas, and you're never going to get your margins and all this stuff. And it took over a year to invent, but I was turned down everywhere. I learned a lot, about retail and everything here, and they all do work on this. They don't care if a product works, they only care if it sells. But I'll tell you what, it has saved me numerous times, because here's the downfall of making stuff overseas. Number one, what if your footprint changes and you need more or you need less? By the time it gets here after 90 days or whatever, I think we're learning this during this pandemic, all the reliance on China. If you're a businessman and you're reliant on ships coming from seas, coming from overseas, you end up having to airship it in, and it costs you even more than it would if you'd have made it here. The reward of being able to look at every product that comes off the assembly line like it was your very own, like you'd use it yourself, and having all my friends and family working, and it's just so rewarding. And so the difference in margin nowadays, I think you're better off even price-wise making it here, because things have changed so much. If one thing goes wrong and you're stuck with them.
Oh, it's such a good point. Okay, let's talk about pros and cons. So, because we've just been told for years and years all the pros of doing business in China. So you said the con is you have the long delay of getting things shipped overseas. What's maybe another con of doing business overseas?
You're tying up all the money too. You're tying up money. They take, this is if you take, there's one product I have to make overseas because there's no weavers or spinners left in the United States. So I'm well versed in that. That's my Giza sheets. Well, you can't make sheets in the United States. Everyone says, Mike, why aren't you buying U.S. cotton? I buy U.S. cotton for my pillows, my towels, everything. But the one thing I can't make here is sheets. So I have learned a con is you have to tie your money up to go, and then if you get someone else, a middleman, to cover the money, now they've cut into that margin. By the time you get through this, that margin is not what people think it used to be. It used to be the thing is, well, let's just make it cheaply over there and then bring it over here for that margin. I make products that are all about quality. And if you start with quality and worry about the money afterwards, you can get that. I know people would rather pay for quality and U.S. than pay for stuff that doesn't work and comes from overseas. And it's so sad too, because our entrepreneurs, the copycats that are out there, you get an entrepreneur invents something here and 2 months later, there it is on the shelf going, what is my product doing here? Our patent laws and everything else, when I got a patent on my pillow, I only got it. The main thing was I knew I'd be trying to be copied, but I got it so I could always make it myself and nobody could stop me from making it. And it's been a big thing. I'm actually going to launch a thing called mystore.com. It's going to help entrepreneurs throughout this country. I've been working on it 2 years, a safe platform for them. And if any of box stores, if they copy, or Amazon copies that one of my entrepreneurs and copies them, I'll just turn off the water and say, I'm not selling to you anymore. I've already done that to a very big retailer for 3 years now. I won't name it on TV, but these, I'm not going to put up with it anymore of our entrepreneurs being copied and all their dream goes up in smoke.
What do the patent laws say that allow a company to do that?
Here's what patents do. Right now they're getting overturned to a rate it's like 80% in DC. They don't even bother and copy you anymore. They just copy you, and then you fight in court, and you don't have the money as an entrepreneur to fight them, and they run you out of money. Or you go to mediation and say, okay, here you go, entrepreneur, here's a couple $100, and they've already ruined your dream and stole all your money. Well, here, and now what they're doing is they discredit your patents. So they go to Washington, they go in there and somebody gets paid off, and all of a sudden you had a patent for 7-8 years and going, what do you mean it's no good? Because they have better lawyers, they're bigger, they're more powerful. But these are the things I'm doing, and I want to change in this country because I have the platform to do it. For me, I could have quit a long time ago, lived off the Minnesota State Fair or some state fairs when I used to do, and just call it a day. My platform getting so big to be able to help other entrepreneurs and help right what's wrong in this country. Another thing, frivolous lawsuits. Lawyers out of California that start these suits all the time that attack people just for craziness, absolutely insanity. It should be loser pays in this country. We get back to a time where lawyers did a job instead of mediation and who's going to make the more money on this side. And well, let's see. I'm going to have to plead. I was attacked after when I went all in for the president, and a Better Business Bureau lowered me from an A+ to an F because they said I ran my ads too long for the people, gave them a special. And I actually said to them, I said, well, what if Mike, you're your own manufacturer, that you can't do that. And I said, everybody runs a sale. I said, you're telling me that since I'm my own manufacturer, if I made them in China and brought them here and said, suggest a manufacturer price, I'd be okay? And she said, yes. I said, you all ought to be ashamed of yourself. But then lawyers came after me. They come in. So you have to admit that you could be found guilty, but you settle and give them money for nothing. You give them money for nothing because in the long run, they would run you out of money. That's what's wrong with so much stuff.
This is what I'm hearing, Mike. I hear there's a push and a pull with China. So there's a pull. There has been a pull from China. China saying, "Hey, make your stuff here. We'll do it cheaper." So that pulled companies out. But I hear there's all these things that you're mentioning here in America that we're pushing companies out of America as well. So I think China's helped us with the pull. There's no more pull anymore because they're communist and horrible, and everyone knows that now. But let's now work on the pushes in America. Get rid of those so people don't even have a desire to leave in the first place. Sir, I want to ask you about masks.
Start with medicine. Start with medicine. I mean, all the medicine and everything that's right. Just the bottles for medicine. Just the bottles are almost 100% made in China and Turkey. This is craziness. This is insanity. They've got all the power That's going to change now after this pandemic.
I think that's right. And you're leading the way with what you can do. And I love it. Let's talk about the masks. When did you decide to do it? And what was the biggest hurdle in retooling your factory from pillows to masks?
Well, we're very good at scaling. We're very good at changing, adapting. I've been through this so many times, so I think, and I have a great crew. We're able to do that. And this was about I don't know the exact date. It was 5 days before I ended up at the Rose Garden for that speech, but it was like the week before when we started. But the week before that, I told some of my sewers, I said, you guys make me some mask prototypes. And then I had to go out and do due diligence and find out what would be legal to allow. And first time I bought the wrong elastic. You're not supposed to have latex. So I had to dump that. And these are just little things I knew existed because I've been in the fabric business. I've been in this. The real good thing is my fabric matched exactly for the cloth mask and even overshot. They wanted like 200 thread count. We were like 400 and some. But then we took all the sewing machines. The biggest hurdle was making my company at that time. Nobody really knew what safe was. So we had to make it safe for my employees. So I made it, 8 feet apart. I overdid it, 8 feet apart. We all gave masks when they came in. We sanitized with this 60-day sanitizer. I wanted them to feel safe to come to work. So that was it was a challenge, but using all our space, we had enough space. And everybody we've always felt like we're helping people, whether it's been a hurricane, we've given, 80,000 pillows to Hurricane Harvey. We always love to help. Campfires in California. Well, this was on a scale unprecedented. And my employees, they love our what we do as a company, and it goes all the way down. And then getting other places to make my pillow, like the covers for the toppers, we got them on board right away too. And I would say there wasn't anything one harder than the other. It was basically knowing the right thing to make. And there was a lot of phone calls because everyone's going, well, no, you need these N95s or KN95s. They said, no, we want to make cloth masks that help,
How many masks are you making now?
We're upwards around, between all my other 4 places, a little over 50,000 a day.
Wonderful. How does someone buy one of those?
We're not selling them. What we've done is we've donated probably hundreds of thousands, but it is hundreds of thousands, probably. And what we've done is we started with the hospitals. We're going in layer of needs. We're not selling to the public. We're going in layer of needs. First, it was the hospitals. Then it was like nursing homes. It was first responders. It's cities. Many cities have called us, and VA hospitals and all these things. So we have a whole task force.
Do they know that they're getting a My Pillow mask, or is it just a mask? They don't know.
We don't put My Pillow on it. This is a terrible pandemic. I believe we're not going to be, I know some things where there's good things coming, and I don't believe that masks are going to be a long-term thing. I don't, all the stuff you see online and stuff now where they're making designer masks, that's good for now, but I don't plan on staying in that particular part of the business.
I have to run here, sir, and I'm so grateful for your time, but last question for you. You mentioned earlier how much you love the pride you get of seeing your employees and Made in America and the pillow come right off like your product. I want you to help encourage other businesses to come back to America too. What's the biggest pro of doing business in America versus overseas?
The quality, and if you start with quality and you treat every customer like it's your only customer, the money just comes in. I encourage every entrepreneur and businessman. And we were getting there right before this pandemic. Our president had built the greatest economy in history, where every consumers, entrepreneurs, and businessmen were taking chances because they had jobs to fall back in that were high paying to fall back on. It's like a safety net. And I'm telling you, it's the most rewarding thing there is, where you can actually see the product. You outsource right here in the U.S. Some stuff you might have to get overseas, parts of it, if they don't make it here, like a diamond mill or something. But there's nothing better. And if you got to realize, if one company comes here, about 5 more come to it, just like when they leave. A snowmobile company years ago, U.S., and then the parts, the seats, the bolts and everything leave with it. You bring a company back and everything, it's going to just flourish and create jobs next door. You see all these jobs. It's so rewarding.
I hope one of the things that come out of this is that companies coming back, being more like MyPillow. What are the odds? From crack addict to CEO, Mike Lindell. Fantastic to talk to you, sir. Please keep the president's ear. I'm so grateful you have it, and keep doing all the wonderful work, sir.
Thanks for having me on. God bless.
Mike Lindell. More coming up. America's helping hands. Spread the word. Hey, Study Crusaders, welcome back to our special COVID-19 America's Helping Hands. I want to go to an expert here who we're so grateful for every time he's on the show, Gordon G. Chang. His Twitter is Gordon G. Chang. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. And his book is The Coming Collapse of China. Mr. Chang, how are you, sir?
Very fine, and thank you so much, Mike.
Well, thank you for being here. I want to know your sense on whether you think the American people are properly blaming China for this whole virus thing. And I want to ask you about the American people, and then maybe we could talk about the administration, and then we can go out to the world. But you can start anywhere you want here. But are people putting the blame where it should be, you think?
Oh, clearly, China deserves substantial blame. And matter of fact, I think that the American people don't understand the depth of the maliciousness of the Chinese regime. We got to remember that China acknowledged human-to-human transmission only on January 20, but doctors in Wuhan, the epicenter, knew about this second week of December, maybe even earlier. Now, if during that 5.5 or so week period, if Beijing said nothing about H2H, human-to-human transmissibility, that would have been grossly irresponsible. But what China tried to do during that period is convince the world it was not human-to-human transmissible. And at the same time, Beijing also pressured countries not to impose travel restrictions on arrivals from China. You put those two together, and you have to conclude that China wanted to spread this disease beyond its borders. Now, we don't know what was in the mind of Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, but if after having seen how the coronavirus crippled his own country, if he wanted to cripple other countries by spreading the virus elsewhere, he would have done exactly what, in fact, he did. So I think the American public and the Trump administration need to be more realistic and understand how malign China really was. This was a direct attack on the world and, of course, a direct attack on the United States.
I'm 100% with you. Is it true that China stopped flights out of Wuhan at a certain point, Wuhan to the rest of China, but did not stop flights from Wuhan to the rest of the world? Is that true or no?
That specifically is probably not true, but the broader story of what you're getting at is true. So, for instance, from about January 23, Wuhan and surrounding areas in Hubei province were locked down. But China itself was still allowing flights from its country to elsewhere. And indeed, when about 5 million people left Wuhan before the imposition of the quarantine, which meant that you had Wuhan people all over China, and some of them, of course, were flying elsewhere. So this is a broader story of China knowing that a quarantine would be effective because it just imposed one in a large part of its own country, did not stop travel elsewhere. And by the way, China later on imposed a quarantine and absolute travel ban on foreigners arriving in China. So this is a story where the larger point you're getting at is indeed true. It's another point showing how bad China was in this coronavirus epidemic.
So we know to blame China. Do you sense that the American people in general are also placing the blame squarely on China? Because you heard the Governor Cuomo yesterday or 2 days ago called it the European virus.
Well, I didn't hear that part. I heard that Cuomo actually said that. And I think probably what he was referring to is that the infections in New York primarily were caused by arrivals from Europe. But we got to remember the people in Europe were affected because of arrivals from China.
Sure.
So this is still a China story. And the American people, yes, they do blame China. But as I said, the more we understand about what Beijing did during those critical weeks from December to January, I think we will have an even deeper appreciation of just how evil China was in this.
So we've talked before about China's influence around the world with the Belt and Road Initiative and the Health Silk Road and all these other efforts to control parts of the world. Have they been successful in using that leverage to make other countries not blame them? So like how are the rest of the world blaming China? Are they blaming China as much as we're properly blaming China, or are they bought and sold by China now, so they're not saying much?
The rest of the world is maybe a week or 2 weeks behind America, but it's moving in the same direction of holding China to account. There's real anger in Europe, for instance. You know, this whole idea of Chinese diplomacy, as you mentioned, Health Silk Road, that actually was working for a couple weeks, you know, as China was donating personal protective equipment, masks and diagnostic kits. But then people understood that the masks and stuff were substandard and the diagnostic kits didn't work. And then what China did is it really started a new phase of what people in Beijing call this wolf warrior diplomacy, which is incredibly hostile and aggressive. So we have seen China really change its attitude. There have been military provocations, and there have been all sorts of statements by Chinese diplomats that are not very diplomatic.
So the face mask diplomacy, you're saying that's no longer. That was maybe they tried it and they failed because everything was so substandard and the tests didn't work and the masks didn't work. So now they've moved on to a different strategy. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes. And essentially what's happened is, we have seen, and this is really dangerous, Mike, we have seen boat bumping and other incidents in the South China and East China Seas. That's against Japan, Taiwan, the Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Chinese friend, Malaysia. Also, there have been these increasing threats to invade Taiwan. And we've seen statements from a Chinese diplomat saying that Kazakhstan, which is an independent country in Central Asia, should be a part of China, which is just incredibly bold. And then in addition to top of that, there have been Chinese diplomats who've been making inappropriate comments about the domestic policies of other countries. And about 6 or so Chinese diplomats have actually been called on the carpet by other countries, most notably by France, which was really pissed off by what a Chinese diplomat, their ambassador, said about French policy toward its own elderly citizens. So this is a real new phase for China, which is, you can see strains of it in the past, but now Chinese diplomats have just gone on a bender.
Wow, so why? What's the strategy there? What's the intent?
That's a great question, and we don't really know. My sense is, as Arthur Waldron of the University of Pennsylvania says, that China doesn't really have a foreign policy. It has a domestic policy that has foreign repercussions. And taking that theory, which I think is probably right, essentially what we're seeing is intense political turmoil at the top of the Chinese political system. I think that has resulted in Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, trying to double down on his aggressiveness. And because of that, we've had these provocative and belligerent statements. And so that is just a guess. But it seems that China's going on, whatever it is, Mike, whatever the explanation is, it is really very, very dangerous. And we are at the point where anything can happen. Anything can happen.
Do you think Xi has more power within China now or less power after all this, or in the midst of all this?
My sense, and it's only a sense, is that he at the moment has less power because his policies have been proven not to be effective. But that doesn't mean he's on the way out, because if his diplomacy, as the Chinese think of it, we would think of it as aggression. If Xi Jinping's approaches work, then he's going to end up more powerful. But if, as I think they're going to fail, then he could very well be out. He could lose his position, he could lose his freedom, he could lose his assets, he could lose his life, who knows? But Xi Jinping has taken the Chinese political system, which was sort of this consensus-driven system, and he's made it a one-man regime. And whenever that happens, you can have all sorts of things occur, because then the infighting gets intense, and when people lose, they can lose everything.
Okay. We talked about Europe. Do you have any sense about how countries in the Middle East and/or Africa are handling all this, or more specifically, how they're blaming China or not blaming China?
Africa is a big story, but I think the general trend is that China has been losing friends in Africa over the last several months. And part of it is coronavirus, but also part of it is this Belt and Road program, where Beijing extended loans on projects which were not economically viable for the most part. And African countries are now facing repayment crises. And this, of course, is poisoning their view of Beijing, especially as common folk in these African countries realize that these loans were taken on board by corrupt elites, that basically Beijing just paid off a lot of people. And so there's a lot of common anger. Now, there's been common anger at Beijing before in the past in Africa for a number of reasons, including those related to corruption. But now I think it's a little bit more widespread, and it has been intensified because of the coronavirus.
So the Belt and Road, like all those projects you mentioned, that was the plan by China all along. So it's going according to plan for them. So do they consider it successful, even if the people of Africa and the Middle East are ticked off at them for it going according to plan, or not?
A lot of Chinese policy analysts think Belt and Road was not a good idea from the get-go, or almost from the get-go, because they realized that what they were doing was building infrastructure that the private sector just didn't want. And there are a lot of other reasons where I think we're going to find Belt and Road actually really undermining Beijing, because debt trap diplomacy, of course, it traps the debtors, but it also traps the creditor, because the creditor then gets overextended. And we have seen at least some suggestions that China is overextended on Belt and Road. There's a lot more to be said on this, because we don't know how these debt renegotiations, which are just beginning in Africa and elsewhere, how they're going to go. But if they go, the way we would expect them to, I think Beijing is going to be in greater trouble, and it's going to be obvious that's the case. Now, this is not to say that Belt and Road isn't a threat. There are parts of it, like the container port they're building in the Bahamas, which is like less than 100 miles east of Palm Beach. That's a real threat to the United States. But these projects are so grand that I think there's going to be blowback on Beijing, and people in China realize that.
Very good. My wife always asks, and you've heard this before, how can we make China pay? Like, that seems to be the expression, right? Make them pay. How do you think through that, and what things could our government do to hold them accountable?
Well, one of the things that just occurred in the last couple of days is that President Trump essentially directed the thrift savings plan, which is the federal pension money for the military and senior federal employees. He directed that not to make investments in China, which is a good thing. That's started to make China pay, and Beijing is livid about that. We can take greater steps to get our companies off Chinese soil, to accelerate this move of our companies going elsewhere, the supply chains diversifying themselves. Also, we've got these lawsuits in federal district court, class actions. State of Missouri has sued China and the Communist Party. Those are, I don't know how far they're going to get, but they do put pressure on Beijing. And the most important thing is China holds more than $1 trillion of U.S. Treasury obligations that is subject to seizure. We shouldn't do that by ourselves for a number of reasons. But if we were to do that in conjunction with other countries that have issued debt that China holds, then I think we got the makings of a real solution. So we get the Canadians, the British, EU, Swiss, Japanese. We get everybody together. That is the makings of a real solution, because that really puts China in a hole.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye out for that. Geez, that'd be a big move. So we're late here. I only got with 30 seconds. I know you do too. What do we need to know about China hacking into our university computers? What are they looking for, and what's the point of that?
They're looking for everything. For instance, dirt on people, but most important, they're looking for technology. China has the world's greatest, most determined campaign to take technology. They steal hundreds of billions of dollars of US IP a year. This has got to stop. And we've had a number of presidents in the past who didn't take steps or took steps that they knew would be ineffective. Trump administration has got a new policy. That's a great thing.
Wonderful. Gordon G. Chang. Please follow on Twitter to continually get this insight. Beautiful. Gordon G. Chang. And the book is The Coming Collapse of China. Mr. Chang, it's an honor, sir. Thanks for your time.
It's an honor for me. So thank you very much, Mike.
Tons of great insight here. Super excited to learn more. More coming up. COVID-19. America's helping hands. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Steady Crusaders, I want to wrap up our special COVID-19 America's Helping Hands with Dale Bannon. He's the national spokesperson from a group that, this is an interesting statement, probably does the most work, the most good for the most people that gets the least amount of recognition and credit for it. And I think that's a testament to how long they've been doing it and what a wonderful job they're doing, that this is like an assumed part of our life and we don't think about them enough, unfortunately. And that's the Salvation Army. Mr. Bannon, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Mike. Thank you so much for having me on your program.
My pleasure. Do you think that's a fair statement? I mean, you guys are just so ingrained in our psyche, in our culture, in our communities, and doing so much work. I remember when I first heard locally in San Diego, all the work Salvation Army is doing, I was absolutely blown away. And I'm sure that's true during COVID as well. I want to talk international, but nationwide, what's Salvation Army doing specifically because of COVID?
Sure. Well, I'm humbled by your words. As you may know, the Salvation Army has been in existence for 155 years. Our mission is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ and meet human needs in his name without discrimination. We've been doing that ever since the pandemic hit globally, and especially here in the United States, serving in local communities all over the world, meeting local needs. Just here in the U.S. alone, so far we've distributed almost 1.5 million food boxes, 4 million prepared meals. We're sheltering the homeless, meeting the needs of the most vulnerable in every community. And what we find is we've been in local communities before this pandemic. We're here now to serve, and we know that this is going to be a long-term recovery for the individuals and families we serve. We're going to be here for a long time helping people who are struggling because of this pandemic.
What's different? Because like you said, you've been here for a long time. You've been in communities for 100 years. What's different now from 3 months ago in what you're doing and how you're doing it?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, just from sheltering the homeless alone, we've had to add shelter bed capacity. Local and state governments have said to us, we could contain this virus, but then if this virus gets spread in homeless camps, for instance, and many people who are homeless don't have access to healthcare or hygiene products. So we've met that need. We've said to state and local officials, we will add more bed capacity to care for the most vulnerable. Another way that we've changed our operation, we operate in 7,600 centers of operation all over the United States. We would have a food pantry in almost all of those centers. And that's where you could just go in and if you had a need, you were living in poverty or you lived paycheck to paycheck, you could pick out products. Immediately within the first couple of weeks, we were establishing drive-through pantries where people would come in their line of their car to adhere to social distancing. We put a food box in their car trunk and they'd move on. And from there, we've evolved where people started calling us. I have one example, a teenage daughter in North Carolina knew of our drive-through pantry, calls the local Salvation Army and says, my mom is disabled, we have no transportation, we have no way to get food. Is there any way you can deliver a food box to our home? And the Salvation Army staff and volunteers met that need, put the food box on their doorstep. These are the kind of stories that are happening all over the country and even globally, where we're just adjusting, we're meeting need where it exists, and trying to be a beacon of hope and light when sometimes people are without hope if you've lost your paycheck, for example.
Absolutely. Let's talk globally, as you mentioned. I think people would be amazed how far the Salvation Army's reach is, and therefore, if you donate, how far your reach is as well. But where are you guys?
Yeah, so we're in 131 countries globally. And of course, this pandemic impacts every country in the world. In Brazil alone, we're feeding meals, people who are hungry. We're distributing hygiene kits. In Haiti, as you know, they're still recovering from the devastation of the earthquake. We have a healthcare clinic. We've established hand washing facilities, such a crucial need in Haiti with clean water. In Uganda, we're distributing hygiene products to remote villages. And in Sri Lanka, we're delivering hand soap to so many who need it. Those are just a few examples of where we're working all over the globe. Our international headquarters is in London, and our general of the Salvation Army has established an international response team to get resources where it's needed to help people who are in need all over the world.
So I'm listening and I'm just watching. I'm looking at this map you guys have on your website of the world and all the different places that you're doing things. It's like it seems impossible. Like, I mean, you have we talk a lot on the show about global supply chains. The Salvation Army has a global supply chain and communication chain like as big as any company or mega corporation in the world. I mean, you guys are all over Africa, all over India and South America. It's remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, obviously they don't call it an army for nothing. So we are able to mobilize. Right. We're able to mobilize pretty quickly, and it's by the grace of God and through incredible people who come alongside us and support. And I have to say, now more than ever, that support is crucial. Just here in the United States alone, there were two things that have set us back a bit. One is almost all of our thrift stores have been closed for 2 months due to social distancing. That's an incredible stream of revenue for us. All spring fundraisers have been canceled. And so we're seeing people step up. Now more than ever, we need your help. You can go to the SalvationArmyUSA.org website. When you give a donation in the United States, those donations go right back to the local community to serve needs in your neighborhood, your neighbors. That's a unique benefit of giving to the Salvation Army. National headquarters, we send every donation to the local community to do the most good. We also have found that people, when they've been shopping, you're buying products for your home. Some people are having those delivered. We're accepting in-kind products to help us with those drive-through pantries, non-perishable items, hygiene products, PPEs. We will take them to serve the most vulnerable. When you give us a can of tuna this morning at your local Salvation Army, I can guarantee you most likely it's going to be given out to a family in need by that evening.
How does someone give? Because I want to give and I want it to stay locally, but what if I also do want to give so that it can go to Uganda, as we're looking at the map here, and how you guys are providing the first one I just randomly picked on, 20,000 bars of soap to families to help them wash hands in Uganda. Like, how, can someone donate specifically to the international missions?
Yes, you can go to salvationarmy.org. We also have the Salvation Army World Service Office that operates in the United States that funds projects all over the country. So you give through the United States Salvation Army World Service Office. All of that information and links can be found on our website at salvationarmyusa.org. Okay. It will provide you with a link for how you can give internationally.
Perfect. You talked about fundraisers you've missed out on and thrift stores. I also think ahead to Christmas, right? I mean, that's obviously one of your big drives, and I wonder, who knows what the virus will look like around the holiday shopping time in malls, if they'll be open and all that. So that's going to be difficult as well. So please donate is my point. Can we talk about hope and the spiritual bread that you give as well? Because that's the most important mission. You started right off with that. How do you do that, and why is that so important in this time?
So many people are under stress during this pandemic. Many of the families we serve were living in poverty, and most were living paycheck to paycheck. And now that paycheck has been removed. I recall back to the 2008 recession. It took us as a country 2 or 3 years to bounce back. And during that period of time of bounce back, we found that the Salvation Army in the United States alone served 10 million more people. People that we serve are the first ones to lose. They were the first ones to lose the paycheck during this pandemic, and most likely will be the last ones to bounce back. And so some feel without hope, and they feel alone. Sometimes they feel isolated. And so what's important to us, we meet the social need, but we offer the spiritual as well. Just as one example, we were feeling the need all over the country of people who are lonely and isolated. We established a hotline that's open from morning till night. It's 1-844-458-HOPE. That's 4673-1-844-458-HOPE. We have people who have been trained just to provide a listening ear and to offer prayer with people. And I really believe as well that even for our donors, we're providing hope, because when you give to someone, we truly believe, our faith tells us that when we help our neighbor, hope always overcomes fear.
And everyone is fearful for some reason, but you guys are giving that hope and spreading it around the world. I love it. I'm so inspired, so grateful for you guys. Dale Bannon, Salvation Army. What's the website again? SalvationArmyUSA.org.
Yep, SalvationArmyUSA.org. Thank you so much, Mike, and may God bless you and your viewers.
You as well, Dale. Appreciate you very much. Keep up God's work. Slater Crusaders, America's helping hands. Thanks for being here. We'll see you on Monday. Spread the word.